Good morning, church. Today's reading is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, Mark 6:30. Then the apostles gathered around Jesus and told him everything they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come with me privately to an isolated place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and there was no time to eat. So they went away by themselves in a boat to some remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they hurried on foot from all the towns and arrived there ahead of them. As Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he taught them many things. When it was already late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is an isolated place, and it's already very late. Send them away so that they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Should we go and buy bread for 200 silver coins and give it to them to eat?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then he directed them to all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they reclined in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to the disciples to serve the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces and fish that were left over, 12 baskets full. Now there were 5,000 men who ate the bread. This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Heavenly Father, thank you for everything you are doing and all the ways that sometimes things get backed up and you just make a way and clear it all out again. So Lord, as we open the scriptures and we open our eyes, we open our hearts to peer deeply into them, Lord, may our hearts be open to you. And that you would look deeply into us and keep on doing all the great work, the great things, the great plans that you have for us. You make them play out for us. That you'd clear the pipes in our soul. And Lord, we trust that even right now, right here in this room, in this space, from these very chairs, that this is a sacred space of encounter with you. Pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So the season of Lent just began about 10 days ago or so on Ash Wednesday. That different Christian traditions over the centuries have been doing this thing and lead up to Easter. 40 or so days between Ash Wednesday and Easter, we deny ourselves something. We fast from a thing, whatever it is. Traditionally sometimes it's chocolate or coffee or whatever it is, giving up something that we enjoy so that we're ready to receive everything at Easter. The promise of Easter is that we get everything that God has intended for us to know. The promise of resurrection, real life, eternal life, our hopes and dreams all fulfilled in everything that God does for us. But first we have to go through this time, this season of denial, going without, the suffering, the deprivation, to fully ready ourselves. And really, we just kind of flirt with it. We're just at the edges of it. I mean, we're not really going through the worst extreme kinds of suffering. We're just getting a taste of it. So Lent, more than just a season, more than just a practice or a tradition, it's kind of a destination. It's a place we go to just begin experiencing something that can be formative in our lives. See, there are all kinds of places that we go in life. Some we choose, some we prefer to avoid. For example, one of the places we like to go in Canada it is just across the street from us. Coffee, when it comes to coffee, it's been said there are 2 types of people in Canada. There are the Tim Hortons people. Close enough, good guess though. And the Starbucks people, of course, you know this. See, coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world after only oil. Everybody they're running their cars on oil and their bodies on coffee, apparently. And in Canada, there is fierce competition for your coffee dollars. Starbucks is increasingly trying to invade the market here, and it's working in sort of the urban areas and with younger generations. But Tim's still owns the highway. Tim still owns overall market share. For every 2 coffees that are sold in Canada, 1 of them is bought at a Tim Hortons. Starbucks is still just a little less than half of that. And so what this basically means is that if you need someone to drive you to get your coffee and to pay for it for you, you prefer Starbucks. But if you can drive yourself and pay for it yourself, you can only afford Tim Hortons. That's basically the way those things work out. But that's one of the places we like to go. Another one are the big box stores. It used to be that we really liked to go to the mall, everything under one roof. But these days, more and more, we prefer the great big box stores. And why not? I mean, if you need 600 pounds of dish detergent, 15 pounds of salmon, 800 AA batteries, and 10 gallons of motor oil, you go to, of course, we love Costco. I love Costco, and free samples to boot. The big box stores, they have changed the shopping landscape. They have changed our cityscapes. We love to go there. They have mostly defeated the mall, but now the big box stores, they're competing with online shopping. And of course, COVID just accelerated this. At the beginning of COVID, the amount of online shopping we were doing doubled, and then it kept growing and growing. Now it's cut back a little bit, but increasingly, we are going online. It's a place that we go to get all the things that we want, all the stuff in our lives. And the brick and mortar stores, they're kind of being left behind. Now, speaking of brick and mortar, though, it seems that if we want to do renovations, we don't go online typically for a lot of our stuff. We still like to go to a Lowe's or a Home Depot where we can touch and feel and see and engage with the things that we want to buy and take home and put in our homes. Now, Home Depot, this is one of the places apparently we really love to go. There are 182 Home Depot stores in Canada, all across Canada. And combined, they employ 37,000 Canadians. A small city of people work for Home Depot in Canada, and a remarkably successful company. And here's part of what has made them so successful. If you need something for your home renovation, their training is so thorough, so consistent across the board. You can go to any one of those 182 stores to look for one of those 37,000 employees. And if you need to ask a question of them, you need some help from one of them, their training is so good, all 37,000 of those employees know how to disappear at exactly the same moment. It's incredible. You've been there, I see. That's one of the places we go. It's one of the places we choose to go. We map our way there. We find our way there. We go on purpose. We're looking for something. We've got some desire, some need, something we're after, a whim. We find all of these places to go in our lives to satisfy these things in us. We even go to digital destinations, the websites and the apps and virtual reality to find what it is we're looking for. To get that like, to get that engagement, to get the interaction, to get the approval, to buy something, find something we hope will satisfy. Whatever it is we're after. And there's just so many places we go, so many things we're in search of. Today, though, in this season of Lent, we're looking at one of the places we rarely choose to go. And in fact, it's a place generally we try to avoid it at all costs. And it's because we think nothing is found there, nothing but pain and discomfort. And who goes looking for that on purpose? And it's not always a geographical location. You can't pinpoint it on the map, because if you could, you'd find a detour around it. Instead, it is a spiritual destination. It's a journey of the heart. And it's the place where the soul will find itself in times of emptiness. It's the place where we hope and we search and we long for something that will finally satisfy, but it's all out of reach. And so we try to go somewhere else. We try to get out of this place, but the unexpected surprise waits for you there. And that is that if you have the patience If you have eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to feel, it's that what you're looking for most might be found where you least expect it. The surprise is that the barren place, the dry place, might be full of potential for life, multiplication over and over, baskets full of life, that if our eyes and our ears and our hearts are open. And so today, this is the journey, opening our hearts to see what's ahead. See, leading into those verses that Justin read for us, there was a passage where Jesus sent his disciples out, and now they're coming back to report to him everything they'd been up to them. He told them to go out, to preach the gospel, heal the sick, do all these great things because I'm giving you my power, my authority. You can go out and do what I do. But first he gave them special instructions. Don't take anything with you. No money, no extra clothes, no extra sandals, nothing. Take nothing but my instruction. Take nothing but my power and authority. Now, usually when we're going to a place, we don't like to go like that. When I am traveling somewhere, when I have chosen a place to go, I pack my suitcase as full as I can. My wife will attest to this. 49.9 pounds, enough that I'm not paying anything extra. But I want to go with everything I need. I want to take home with me, basically. But it seems that when Jesus chooses your destination, it seems that he's all you need. It seems that if you're going to do his work, he is enough. That we don't need any extra resources. And so they go out and they do exactly what Jesus asks of them. And when they get back, they are so excited. They have seen the power of God at work in them and through them, and other people have experienced it. There have been all kinds of great things to report, and they're all pumped up on adrenaline, and they're so excited to tell them everything they've accomplished. And they want to know, they want to hear Jesus tell them, well done, way to go. But it seems that the crowds in all the surrounding towns have also heard about everything they've been up to. They've also heard about everything Jesus is doing, and they want to get in on it too. And so they start to gather. They want some of what the disciples have. And so even though the disciples are super excited about what they've been through, they're also very tired. And Jesus is concerned about them. And so Jesus says, let's go find some place where we can rest and eat. And so in verse 31, he tells the boys, he says, come with me privately to an isolated place. And then the very next verse, verse 32, we're told they head to a remote place. But I guess it wasn't quite remote enough because the crowds from all these towns, they've heard what's going on, they know where they're headed, and they all rush out of their villages and their little towns to get there ahead of them, to meet Jesus and the disciples there. And then the disciples see the crowds coming and they start to pout because they're not going to get to eat and rest. But Jesus doesn't pout. It says his compassion goes out to the crowds as they gather. He's just concerned for them and their well-being because he sees them as sheep without a shepherd. And so he begins to teach them many things. But the disciples, they're still tired. And so in verse 35, a couple verses later, we're told again, they tell Jesus, we are in an isolated place. There is no food here. Skip the dishes does not deliver out this far. Tell these people to get lost and find some food at home. And I don't know whose hunger they're really concerned about, the crowds or their own. But that's not actually the main point here. The main point is what's being emphasized 3 times now. 3 times we've been told they're in this remote location. They're in an isolated place. So remember, the books of the Bible, they were not actually written to be read personally by yourself in your quiet time. They were written for illiterate cultures mostly. And so primarily they were written to be read aloud in contexts like this. And these stories were used to form culture, to form beliefs, to form ways of life. And so they wanted to make the stories as memorable as possible. And one of the ways they would do that, one of their techniques, is through rhyming and repetition. And so when we hear their location 3 times in just a few verses, it's supposed to tell us how important that is. Now, when we hear repetition in our writing, we don't like it. We get bored of it. But here, it's like a highlighter has been dragged across it. And it's actually the same Greek words, and each time they talk about the place they are. Like I said, we don't like repetition, so the translators mix it up every time. But in Greek, every time it's the eremos topos. And most of the time, when you read this through the Bible, This is the desert place, or the wilderness. If you look it up in a lexicon, it's defined as the dry place with sparse vegetation. And so in the Greek version of the Old Testament, the eremos topos, that's the desert, that's the wilderness that the Israelites spend 40 years wandering around in to get from Egypt to the Promised Land. It's the place we hear about for Jesus where he goes for 40 days to be tempted by Satan. And it is a literal place for sure, but it is not just a spot on the map. The desert is a place where it is dry and the sun is hot and everything withers and there is sparse vegetation and nothing seems to grow there. So it's lifeless. And it's remote. It's isolated. So the desert place is a lonely place. There is no one to comfort you. It seems like there is no one who understands you. There is no one to rub your back, to tell you it's going to be okay. There is no one to offer you the hope that you long for. And it seems like in the desert place, in the middle of nowhere, the horizon is unchanging no matter which direction you look. So you don't know where it begins, you don't know where it ends, you don't know where to go. It's so hard to navigate. And that sounds like a place to avoid. Nobody wants to go there on purpose. There's nothing there that you want, like Starbucks or Tim Hortons or Home Depot. And yet, all of our paths will lead there one time or another. Inevitably, life will take you to the desert place. It's not always geographical. If you could find it on the map, you would take the detour. But this is a destination of the soul. This is what's called a liminal space. A liminal space is kind of like a doorway. It's the space between the room you were in and the room you're going to, but it's neither one of them. It's a different space altogether. It's not where you used to be, and it's not yet where you will be. It's the doorway between. It's an in-between kind of space. That's the desert place. The desert place is the before that comes after. It's the place where it's after the symptoms have cropped up. It's after the tests have been done. It's after the diagnosis. But before the recovery, maybe before the treatment, before there's any kind of healing, when there's still just the fear and the worry and the uncertainty, that's the desert place. It's after the economic downturn. It's after the savings have dwindled. It's after the job has been lost and your identity evaporates with it and you just don't know what the future holds. You don't know what the kids will eat. You don't know where you will live or where you will go. You do not know what's next. You don't know who will stand by you. That's the desert place. It's after all the substances and all the addictions, they have ravaged your body and they have ravaged all your resources and your money and your relationships and everything you have, and there's nothing and there is no one left. It's before you find your footing again. You wonder if there will ever be any footing. You wonder if there will be solid ground in front of you to walk on. It's after the person who promised to stand by you has abandoned you or betrayed you or just left. Maybe even they just died. And the one thing that held you up and helped you along is gone. And it's before you know there will be any hope again. All you feel right now is just the emptiness and the shock and the fear. The desert place is that space in between before life returns to normal, the new normal, whatever that is. And sometimes these places, they're just chosen by no fault of your own. It's a depression. It's an accident. It's a mistake. It's somebody else's choice for you. It's a pandemic. It's a disease. And sometimes we do choose it for ourselves. Sometimes it's our sins, it's our secrets, and everything is exposed all at once. And there's no shadow, no shade, no tree to hide under. Everybody can see everything just as it is. That's the desert place. And no one wants to go there, but everybody, all of us, we end up there. When the dreams die, when the frustrations build up, when the burdens get heavy, and we get weary. It's when all of our desires seem to be unmet and unfulfilled. Now, in our part of the world, those desires, typically they're for more material things or status things. Often that's what our hunger is for, the possessions and all those kinds of things. We don't have just basic hunger like so much of the world knows or has known. I was reading an article about the Civil War and all the wars in Iraq over the last couple of decades. First the Americans, and then Civil War and ISIS, and the way it's just continued to ravage and the nation. And of course, it's the most vulnerable. It's the women and the children who just suffer the most. And so a few years ago, it was so bad in the old city of Mosul that the desperation was so high that parents were feeding children the only thing they could get their hands on. For 500 Iraqi dinar, it's about 55 Canadian cents, they could buy a cardboard box. And if they could boil it long enough, it was soft enough to chew. And for today, it was enough to fill a child's belly. And the hope was that tomorrow, maybe tomorrow, hope or help would come and it would deliver them from their hunger. But today, a cardboard box was enough. We don't have that kind of hunger here. We don't know it. And yet, we still end up in the desert place, just like in Iraq, where our desires and our dreams go unfulfilled, and there is a gnawing emptiness inside. And we have been trying to feed our tired, weary, starving souls cardboard boxes. And it is not enough. And so the desert place lingers. We want to avoid it at all costs. It's not a place we choose to go. And yet it seems that God makes sure our paths will take us there. There's no way around it. I wonder if it's just that from his perspective, the desert place, this dry, lifeless place of uncertainty, is also the place of miraculous multiplication, where there is great hope. So you don't get to decide whether or not you go to the desert. If you're a disciple of Jesus, it just seems that somehow he makes sure you follow him there. Your choice then is only to decide how you spend your time in it. And we're just going to look at a couple critical ways to do that and before we close up here. And the first one is just this. It is to discipline the appetites. And we talk about this often around here, and frankly, we also don't talk about it enough. So you know that feeling. I did this yesterday more than once, where you go into the kitchen and you open up the fridge door and you scan from top to bottom and the door itself, and then you look in the freezer, and then you step aside and you open the pantry door and you look through there and you look around. And what are you looking for? You're looking for something to snack on, something to put in your belly, but not because you're hungry, but because so often our appetites get disordered. The wires get crossed in them. And we use the wrong things to feed the wrong appetites. We don't do it because we're physically hungry. We don't hear our bellies growling. We do it because our hearts feel empty. And so we will fill an empty heart with anything we can try and find to fill that void. We will turn to food and sex and porn or drugs or whatever kind of habit. We're all addicted to something, maybe not a substance, but we all have something we turn to in those moments to try and soothe an anxious heart, to try and medicate our pains. We all have patterns, things we go to, digital places. But your soul won't be fed there. So in the desert, all the extras get stripped away. Spiritually, there are no more fridges or cupboards to stare into. And in that space, something critical happens. Your true longings for true wholeness, for true fulfillment, they get awakened. And the barrenness you experience around you begins to distinguish and discern what you really is that you desire. This is what happens for an addict when they hit rock bottom. This is what happens when the people in your life refuse to keep enabling your bad habits or your temper or your lousy attitude. This is what happens when the people around you turn their backs on you, when sins and the secrets, they're all exposed, and you feel more alone than ever, more naked than ever. And it can feel like a curse. And yet it might just be the very gift you need to see things as they really are, to see what it is you long for, what your appetites really crave. See, about a year or so into the COVID-19 pandemic, the experts started talking about the other COVID-19. And that was the 19 or 20 pounds that people started to put on over COVID. Instead of going places, we found out the places would come to us. You could just click the phone and there is everything you needed at your doorstep, all the food you could crave. And it seemed that as we were cut off from our regular routines, our normal ways of life, all the places we go to fill these appetites, we started filling them other ways, especially with food, the despair, the uncertainty, the worry. We tried to feed our soul, we'll skip the dishes. But here's why you need to discipline your appetites. If you don't master them, they will master you. You will become a slave to your appetites. This is what addiction is. Normally, your will governs the appetites. You get to choose what it is you go after. But in an addiction, it's when your appetite enslaves the will. It gets flipped around and you become a slave to them. And this is a difficult lesson for us to learn. You can be a disciple of Jesus for many years, many, many years, and yet we still need to learn and relearn this message over and over and over again. In John chapter 4, there's this story where Jesus is leading his disciples through the remote desert place, the middle of Samaria, where there is a well. And he sends his disciples on ahead to get some food. And then Jesus, in the desert place, goes to a woman who would normally be the kind of woman that you might look to fill the wrong kind of appetite. And he has this conversation with her. And when the disciples get back, they think Jesus must be hallucinating from hunger or something. He's hangry, and so they want him to take a snack, eat a bite of Snickers or something, and snap back to reality, make sure things go back to normal. But Jesus tells them, I have food you know nothing about. And they're like, what food? Where did you get food from? Out here there is nothing. But for Jesus, he knows how to sustain real life. In his connection with God, he can feast on God's love for him, and his hope, his real hope, is beyond anything a meal or a snack could offer him. That when his soul is nourished, he doesn't need a woman to satisfy his appetites. He doesn't even need the disciples to bring him food. See, when you find yourself in the desert place and all the extras, everything is stripped away from you, you can discover this too. You know what it is to discipline your appetites. You can turn away from the unhealthy things and move toward all the helpful things in your life. And then you get to show up for the food and drink of the Lord. You can taste and see that the Lord is good. You can trust that what he is what you need when you need it, and it is enough. And this is what happens for thousands of people that gather in the crowd that day. They eat literal bread and fish that fills their bellies, but more than that, they have been truly satisfied. It says, all ate and were satisfied. Something more than that happened, that they ate from the very hand of Jesus, the hand that will soon be pierced for their sins, for their suffering. And that's where real satisfaction is found. And that's what you can find too in the desert place, that the old ways will lose their hold on you and new ways become more appealing and open up in front of you. But to be able to walk in the new ways, to follow those new paths, you need what the second step offers. And that's this, just to lean on your shepherd. See, when you're ready to walk in a new way that you've never walked before, you need a wise guide to show you the way, someone who has been there, who knows the terrain, who can navigate it well. So, for example, climbing Mount Everest is one of the hardest, most challenging, most difficult exercises of endurance that any humans have ever tried. I don't know why they do it, but people keep on doing it. For hundreds of years almost, we've been doing this thing, over 100 years, of climbing this mountain, and people will spend years and thousands of dollars of hard-earned money to train their mind and train their body to be able to do this. And even still, when it's time to climb, they often hire a Sherpa to show them the way. The Sherpa, they're the people who live around there, around Mount Everest, and they've lived there for centuries, generation after generation of them, so their bodies can live at the higher elevations with the reduced oxygen levels. They know how to find shelter in difficult moments. They know how to recognize threats in the journey in front of them. And the thing is, you don't need to hire a Sherpa to guide you up the mountainside. But after all that work and all that preparation, why would you take the risk? Why wouldn't you want someone you trust to show you the way? Someone who's been there and done that. And it is the same thing in the desert place, that after Jesus was baptized in the Jordan by John, the Holy Spirit leads him out into the desert. And for 40 days, he fasts from all the things we long for so often. 40 days, no food, no drink. And in that time, then Satan himself comes to Jesus and tempts him with all of the things we turn to, with all the things we look to satisfy our appetites. He tempts Jesus with power and wealth and privilege, whatever it is that any man could want. And Jesus finds a way to make it through without giving in to any of those temptations. Jesus is our qualified, certified Sherpa. Jesus has made it through the desert. He knows the way. He is the good shepherd. So if you look at the passage again, in verse 34, it said, as Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. See, the people, they find themselves, the crowd gathering out in the desert, because they're lost, looking for someone to show them the way. And Jesus shows up for lost people. Jesus has compassion for people who give into the wrong things in the wrong ways with the wrong people. That's who he comes ashore to give compassion to. He doesn't abandon you in that lonely place where you learn your lesson. He comes to you there. He meets your needs there. He cares for you there. He provides for you there anything you could want and more. And after the disciples have complained, they say, Jesus, there's nowhere to buy food here, and we don't have any money to buy food. Skip the Dishes doesn't deliver this far out. Tell them to go home. Yet Jesus has a plan. Jesus says, you feed them. And so they just gather what they have, a few loaves, a couple fish. And it says in verse 39, it says, he directed them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. And again, it's a note with a highlighter dragged across it. We're told 3 times they are in the dry, remote, barren, desert place, the wilderness. And yet all of a sudden there is green grass enough for thousands of people to sit down on. And here's what I think Mark wants us to think about. And it's the passage that Jeanette referenced earlier, and then Daniel referenced again. This passage, Psalm 23, where David, the great shepherd who knows a lot about the desert places, and he writes, the Lord is my shepherd. And he's in the valley of the shadow of death, which is a real place, a dry place, a hot place out in the middle of the desert. I've been there, unbearable heat. And he says, out there, I lack nothing. Even where there is chaos and there is barrenness, he leads me beside cool waters. He leads me and I lie down in the green grass. He restores my strength and he guides me down right paths. And he does this for the sake of his reputation. So catch that. Jesus will meet you in your sin and in your sorrow, and he will provide for you, and he will lead you from dryness and barrenness to cool water and lush pastures, and not because you've earned it, not because you deserve it, but because of his reputation as a good shepherd who has compassion on lost sheep. That's what he does it for. He does it for who he is, and because how he feels about you. See, David's promise is follow him and lack nothing. In fact, follow him. Not only will he let you follow him, his goodness, his mercy will hunt you down. It will chase you all the days of your life. He's hot on your heels if you're one of his sheep. And even if everyone else has abandoned you, if your own appetites, if they keep betraying you, if your bad habits and the nasty thoughts, they just keep overwhelming you, there is a good shepherd who has what you need. And he is there for you. And he will show you the better way. But sometimes it's the way we least expect. Certainly the way we least prefer. And this is the last piece. To find the blessing in brokenness. The surprise is that the journey through the desert place, the pathway to wholeness, to real fulfillment, it necessarily goes through brokenness. The way of the resurrection always takes you through the cross. I talked about that last week. You see, here Jesus, he takes a few loaves and he is going to do something miraculous to feed thousands of people. He will use a very little bit to bless them with a whole lot. But notice how he does it. Notice what he does. First, he lifts the bread and he blesses it. And then, that which is blessed is broken. And it's in the breaking that it multiplies. There's food and life and wholeness, and all eat and are satisfied. That blessed things are often broken things. And that is where you find real treasure. There's a Christian artist, his name is Japanese, Makoto Fujimura, and he talks about this art form called kintsugi. And he's Japanese. In Japan, a place that you can go, but it's regularly known. It's known for these regular earthquakes. There are frequent earthquakes. And brokenness is a consequence of the earthquakes in Japan, that often it's not just the buildings and the structures that break, but the things within them, things like teapots and pottery. And so kintsugi, it means mending with gold. And in their culture, they value heritage and tradition and longevity. And so possessions like teapots or pottery, they will get passed down through generations and generations. But what happens if they get damaged in one of these earthquakes? Well, they take the pieces and the glue or the lacquer and they add gold and glitter to it, so that as they mend broken things, value is added to it. The broken thing becomes more precious, more treasured, not less so. And the gold, the real treasure, is found as the result of being broken and put back together again, because it is placed there by the hands of the rebuilder. And so do not lose sight of this in your life. Your brokenness, the open wound you feel, the pain you're going through, the sorrow you have, the fears you carry, that is the very place where God is extending his hand to meet you. That is the very place where he wants you to know him as healer, where he wants you to know his compassion for lost sheep. Leonard Cohen has this song lyric, you've heard me quote it before, where he says, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Here's the bad news. You're all a little cracked. For real. And the good news is that is where grace will meet you. It's in the breaking that his compassion is there for us. When you have suffered, when you have lost, when you have wept, then still by faith, one more time, you can look to the hand of the Good Shepherd to lead you, to guide you forward, to do his miraculous work in your life, to create abundance. It's there that you discover real blessing. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those whose heart has been broken and mended, because the pure in heart will see God. See, the temptation in the desert place is just to escape it, to get out of it as quickly as we can. And when it doesn't happen for us, what we think, when we feel like we've been there forever, what it feels like is that God has abandoned me or God has forgotten me. And so God must not really care for me. And yet it is in the desert place where you can truly know the depth of his care for you. It is there that you will feel his provision, the miraculous multiplication for you. It is a blessed place for broken people. But you have to go through it to know it. That's the liminal space, the desert place. It is the doorway between where you were and where you were going, and the Good Shepherd will guide you there. In some African tribes, there's a practice with liminal spaces for when it's time for boys to become men. They go through a liminal space to do that. It's the doorway between childhood and adulthood. And what they do is every year, the fathers gather together all the boys who are around 12 years old or so, and then one evening, they will send them out of the village into the forest, into the jungle around them, a remote place. And kind of like Jesus with his disciples, he sends the boys are sent off, and they can take nothing with them. They just go off into the night together. And so after a while, their bellies will begin to rumble with hunger. And they will have to figure out how to gather together what they will eat. And then they will hear the sounds of the snakes and the critters and the creatures, everything that is moving around them. It may be dangerous, may be threatening. And in those times when they have nothing else left, they have to learn how to lean on each other. They have to learn how to lean on everything their fathers taught them, how to find food and shelter and how to protect each other, how to make it through the night. And they will go off at night into a kind of desert place as boys, but in the morning they will return as men. Their fathers use that space to lead them from boyhood to manhood, from immaturity into maturity. It is there that they become. And your Heavenly Father will use these desert places in your life in the very same way. He will tame your appetites for lesser things. He will teach you obedience. Jesus comes ashore and he has compassion on them, so he teaches them many things. And some lessons are just learned best in the desert, when all the excess is stripped away and the distractions are few, when your energies can be focused on what matters most, the one thing that matters most, to follow the Good Shepherd. And so if you find yourself in the desert place and your soul is growling with hunger, don't look back. Do not worry, do not fear. You are in luck. Because here's what the boys in those tribes don't know during that long night. Here's what you need to know to make it through. Here's what we don't realize in the desert. What they don't know and they can't see after they leave the village is that their fathers have followed them out. And the fathers will form a ring around where those boys are. And during the long night, they're watching and listening and protecting and caring. They are far enough away into the dark night that the boys cannot see they are there. But they are close enough to make sure those boys will make it through no matter what. That they will gain the confidence they need by making it through the night on their own, so they can become like Dad. And this is the compassion of God for you in your desert places. He comes to you even when you can't see him. He will provide for you when you feel hungry. He guides you forward even as you feel lost. He is making a way. He will guide me down right paths for the sake of his reputation. And at the time, like the bread, it can just feel like ripping and tearing and breaking. But in time, it will be the blessing that makes you whole.